Good morning, my name is Stephen Capaldo and it is Wednesday, September 11, 2024. Thank you for watching. Today, since it's the anniversary, if you want to put it that way, or it's the 23rd year of this so-called war on terror, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's been going on since 9/11, 2001, just to note some general trends and really with the conclusion that we've seen really the planet on a downward spiral since then. And what are some of the events that have caused that? What are reasons for it? And what's going to happen? What could be done about it? I mean, is anything good going to come of this? But anyway, those of you that are old enough, which I think the people listening to this are probably all old enough, you remember on September 11, 2001, the towers went down, and there's been a lot of speculation since then. How did they go down? What caused it? And what was the role of Osama bin Laden? And who was he really? And how did he really die? And this and that. Well, it's interesting that by like about 11 a.m. on September 11, 2001, and I remember exactly where I was. I was home that day. I was in my living room in my home outside of Toronto. And by 11 a.m., the war on terror had been proclaimed. It was like it was something expected, something scripted, something simulated that everyone knew was going to come. It was already proclaimed, and Osama bin Laden was the guy who was responsible for it. And it's interesting how the war on terror has changed in a way. If you look in particular this week, what's been happening in Moscow, in Russia. Some Ukrainian drones have been going over the city, and at least one civilian person now is dead, and maybe more. So now so what is that? I mean, it's not a war on terror, it's a war of terror. And I think really in a lot of ways in the last 23 years now, it's been 23 years since this day happened. What we've seen are events which really point to not just that there's some kind of fight against terror, but there are things going on which promote terror. And as far as what happened on 9/11, 2001, while Osama bin Laden was proclaimed to be the villain, and we don't really know a lot about him. There's a speculation that this certainly wasn't done by guys with box cutters. It was much more sophisticated than that, and were there really planes involved? I mean, there is all kinds of speculation what it really was. And who was he? Was he a CIA guy, and how did he really die? And I remember when he was reported dead, which I think was somewhere around May 2012, it was reported in the Security Council that, by the U.S. administration, it was Obama at the time, that, he had been sought out, he'd been hunted down, he'd been shot, and he's dead. It was like 8 lines, and I remember I was in that meeting. I was assigned to that meeting, for translating. But there's nothing to translate. I mean, it was like 8 or 10 line statement that nobody had anything to say about it, and that was the end of the meeting. It was one of the shortest meetings in the history of the Security Council, but that was how his death was reported. So who he was and what he did and how he died, all of this is very shadowy, very secretive. And yet this created this whole narrative about a war on terror. Now we're going to really get the terrorists. We have to get the terrorists. Well, what really happened, if you look at the rise of the neocons in the U.S. and what certain presidents did, I find it funny, in the period right after 2001, you had a couple of wars that started, and Iraq and Afghanistan, and, did the Afghanistan, it ended very chaotically not too long ago. And Iraq, who knows, did that really end? But I mean, it's just, there's been a succession of these wars, and all kinds of, color revolutions, going into the countries and overturning the government and setting up regimes favorable to the neocons, to the U.S. And if you look at the involvement of certain U.S. presidents in all of this, the invading countries, overturning governments, killing people, you can look at Clinton and the Balkans. You can look at George W. Bush and Iraq and Afghanistan. You can look at Obama when he came in, Libya and Syria and Yemen. What the events have been in those countries. And then Trump came in at some point, and while he did not really start new wars, I would say, he also did not end any wars, as far as I can tell. And then Biden, he's being well treated. Him and his family's being well treated, so they're happy to support Israel against Russia. They're happy to, see this genocide going on against the Palestinians. They don't have a problem with that. So there's just this history. The war on terror really has become a war of terror against certain people, certain countries. And yet, when someone like Putin comes along and asserts himself in any way, people are apoplectic. I mean, they're going to have a stroke. They just can't take it. This is a war criminal. Well, if you look at the history and the attempt to negotiate and the restraint and that has been shown by the Russian side in view of the provocations of NATO in particular, and then the U.S., it isn't really comparable. And yet, this guy comes along and he's the bad guy, but all these other guys, the neocons and their presidents who did what they did in those years since 2001, nobody seems to care too much about that. Another trend that emerged in that period, after 9/11, 2001, was a trend to take away personal freedoms, personal liberties. And of course, it's kind of like 1984 Orwellian, when you have these bills that come along called like the Patriot Act and stuff like that, as though we're promoting this great condition of patriotism. No, it isn't really that. It's that you have to be quiet and not challenge anything. And then the FISA courts and the warrantless searches and this type of thing. Little by little, personal freedoms have been eroded in different countries around the world. And that's really a big part of the so-called war on terror, is that you get people to comply, you get people to consent to giving up their freedom. And I think that's kind of the most disturbing thing, is that people have willingly, and especially we saw it in more recent history with COVID, people just willingly consent to giving up their freedom. And if they give it up and they're not going to fight for it, then what is there to do? I mean, who are you going to blame? You can blame all these deep state and these neocons and warmongers and this and that, but who are you going to blame if people willfully give up their freedom? And then you look at strange things that have happened since 9/11 with the weather. You look at Hurricane Katrina, something like that, and how the rescue and search and rescue and cleanup operations were botched and slowed down, and there was a lot of corruption involved around that. Earthquakes, more earthquakes, wildfire disasters, and who knows, I mean, it could very well be that those are deliberately set, right? There is such a thing as weather manipulation. The chemtrails, how the food supply is being manipulated, the environment is being manipulated, what's being done with 5G, 6G, whatever. You look at all of these things that have been done, to the environment in some way, environment in the broad sense, that really have had this terrible effect on people. And it's a more of a war on people. It's not a war against terror. It's a war of terror. It's a war against people. And then after that, if you just kind of look at Hurricane Katrina as kind of a starting point for all of these other disasters that I mentioned, there was a financial disaster. Now, every few years there has to be some kind of financial disaster. There was a big recession or depression in the 1920s and 1930s, and then how do you get your way out of that? Well, you have to start a war or participate in a war, and then that went on for several wars, and then in the 1980s there was another problem. Economic decline, and then into the 2000s, you can recall in like the 2006 to 2009 period, there was the subprime lending disaster. It's that people somehow were able to get mortgages without having any kind of down payment, and then the companies that gave the mortgages went under, and so they needed their money back. So the people who didn't have any equity, they only had debt, they couldn't pay back anything. So a lot of jobs were lost, a lot of houses were lost, a lot of lives were destroyed, businesses were lost. And it was in that period where really there was just a group of people that were making a lot of money on paper, at the expense of other people. And really, the big shots, the big really banksters, they came out of it okay. But sort of the minions that were using them and the people, ordinary people whose lives were destroyed, they didn't come out okay. And that was another prong. If you look at this multi-pronged terror, war of terror, well, you've got the initial act in 2001. You've got all of the wars. You've got taking away liberty. You've got weather and environmental degradation. You've got the financial collapse going on. You've got all of these prongs that are all part of war against people. And then let's say really that the major manifestations of this started with Clinton, before 9/11. But if you look at what happened in the Balkans, and then George W. Bush, and then finally Obama came in 2008 to 2016, and everybody thought, well, this is wonderful. We've elected the first black president, or actually the joke was the first black half black president, but whatever. That isn't really the point. The point is, what did he do? What did he do as far as promoting war? Well, he promoted it. He promoted all kinds of war, and people thought, he was so cool, and, he was going to bring new hope and new life and everything. Look at what happened in Libya, all the killing. And what happened in the embassy there. Look at Syria. Look at that whole thing. The only reason that Syria isn't utterly destroyed is that the Russians went in and, they've tried to stabilize things. And then Yemen, look what's going on with the Houthi, and all of this really was something that Obama was heavily involved in, and so he was like just kind of a made man like the rest of them, and people had this kind of idyllic, romantic idea of him, but what happened, and then the unthinkable happened. Trump came in, and Trump. He appeared to many people to be a solution to this problem, is that people felt like they were getting ripped off, they were frustrated, and Trump appeared to be some kind of a solution, and people tended to put him up on a pedestal, and I think and I hope that we've all learned that we can't do that. Is that maybe Trump can still do something good, but we've learned hopefully that we cannot idolize people or put them up on a pedestal. But he came in and he won unexpectedly in 2016, and he said that he wanted to give power back to the people. But it's very easy to be skeptical because, he's this rich guy with a World Economic Forum Zionist type of background, and is he really for the people, or is he just for himself? So he's playing a particular role. Now, did he do certain things for strategic purposes, and now he's going to do something better? We don't really know. But anyway, what's the whole thing is, what's going on behind the scenes is much bigger and deeper and darker than just who's going to be president. In his first presidency, and then there's some discussion about is there a military government, continuity of government, and in some way is Trump still president, in some fashion. These are things that will ultimately that will be revealed at some point, but we don't know. But for sure, Trump made some bad decisions with bad advisors, and the whole thing, Operation Warp Speed, and doing certain things to please Israel, and killing this Iranian general, one guy with not, at the advice of neocon advisors. And so there are some things there that show that we are justified in having some skepticism about Trump. And then after all of this, we had the event in 2001, we had different wars, we had a persecution of freedoms, freedoms are being taken away, free speech being taken away, all the censorship that's going on, all of the different health challenges, chronic diseases, the weather, the financial system, and all of the different wars that just keep coming and never ending. And then, okay, Trump comes in, he has his first term, he leaves after the first term, and I'm not going to get involved in all of that, what happened and how it happened. I think we got kind of a replay of that if you watched the debate last night, and I plead guilty. I watched the debate. I was interested to see how it would be handled, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But anyway, all of this from 2001 takes us up to 2020. And I've talked about COVID a lot, the COVID deception from 2020 to 2023. And really how two groups of people made it possible for the elites, the rulers, to get away with this crap. And you have the large group of people that's just totally asleep, and you have another large group of people that's they know that something's wrong, but they go along because they fear what will happen if they don't go along. And then you've got a sliver of people at the top and a sliver of people trying to tell the truth, and now more people are starting to tell the truth. But anyway, that COVID deception was really a turning point in world history, and a turning point in the war on terror. Look at all of the things that happened. This is more war of terror, Trump brought in the Operation Warp Speed. Okay, you didn't have to take it, but then Biden came in and you had to take it. If you didn't take it, you could lose your job. You had to wear masks. You had to stay home. Jobs were destroyed, and the economy was destroyed. People were destroyed. Suicides went up. Cancer went up. All kind of things went up. Bad things went up because of this COVID. So now we enter into 2024, and everybody says the most important election ever, and there's a tendency to say that about every election, but this is really a critical election, and people, I guess maybe it's skeptical, maybe it's cynical, but people have the right to ask, does it really matter who wins? Well, I would say on a sort of a supernatural, metaphysical level, there are so many things going on and so many layers of activity that are going on. You could view this presidential election as just one thing. But it is important at its level for what it is. And I think that people should reflect very seriously, and what matters, and what's the better outcome, or what's the better. I don't know if we know what the better outcome is, but if you're going to take a chance on one or the other, who would you take a chance on? That's really what it comes down to. And we had this debate last night, and I think, as far as debates go, there are different comments. There are always different comments. Both sides, whenever there's a debate, both sides always claim victory. So you can't really go by that. But the thing is, did either candidate really, were they persuasive enough to add people to their cause? And to me, it looked like neither one really did enough to add to their cause. I think that really what seriously came across was the comparison between the two debates that have taken place, the Trump-Biden debate and now the Trump-Harris debate. In the Trump-Biden debate, you had the CNN anchors, doing it. And as much as everyone says things about CNN, I thought that they were fairly objective. They were pretty good in that debate. Biden obviously needed help, and they didn't get it from the CNN anchors. The CNN anchors just kept asking questions. What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? And all this type of thing. Then now ABC comes in, and they monitor this debate, or they anchored this debate. And if you look into the background of who's friends with whom, and how the debate was conducted, really. I would say, Trump has a problem, resisting, when he's being baited. He has a big problem. I don't know if he's able to just, when someone baits him, can he just avoid, taking the bait? But he did also, I think, reflect a lot of indignation and anger on the part of ordinary people, and I think actually that was probably part of his communication strategy. I mean, it didn't work perfectly by any means, but I think that he did kind of reflect or channel, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the anger that he knows exists out there. But the thing that was very noticeable about the way the anchors treated this was the area of fact checking. That if you look at how much was one candidate fact checked and how much was the other candidate fact checked, I mean, there was no comparison. You know, Trump was fact checked much more, and maybe it wasn't always legitimate fact checking, but just looking at, you know, quantitatively, that Trump was fact checked a lot more, and Harris was hardly fact checked at all about anything, and was just kind of allowed to just play to her base and change the subject and not really answer the questions. You know, there were some questions that could have been asked, especially in view of some of the comments that Trump made and some of the things that he wanted to know. So, you know, ABC was not going to force Harris into any uncomfortable area, that they were constantly, you know, fact checking Trump. So anyway, I think that reflects on the media, and it's not a very good reflection. So I don't know if there will be another debate, and who knows what's going to happen. You know, I've heard all kind of rumors that somehow, you know, Harris is going to get to be president before the election. Does that mean there won't be an election? Would that change the election? What does it mean if it happened? So if it happened, you know, like what does it mean that, you know, Biden resigns as president? I mean, we don't know where he is anyway, and we don't know what he would be able to say or do or think anyway. So is that a possibility that he would just, under the 25th Amendment or some other reason, that he would just be gone, and Harris would be in before the election day? So who knows? These are just the most fascinating times to be alive, and but we don't really know. So what you really need to do is you have to know who you are in Christ, and you have to know what your calling is, and you have to just have this, you know, passion for your calling, and your desire to be more in the light, and, you know, to share greater love, and just really to harness the divine intelligence, you know, of God, the Supreme Being, and use that to live in your calling, and to pursue your passion. Just remember that it isn't really about the people. You know, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. You know, so we shouldn't really keep that in mind. We should keep in mind that we are supposed to, you know, ascend spiritually, and go for truth. You know, always, you know, live for the truth, and try to find that, and not be deflected from that. That's really the path that we should be on, rather than paying attention to all this human stuff all the time, which, you know, it's interesting to do, and I think there is something to be said of, you know, being well informed about certain things. But if you let these certain things control you, then I think you're going to end up being very unhappy, and you're not going to be able to rise up, you know, supernaturally, spiritually, and, you know, in the mind of Christ, and in the life that the Almighty has for you. So I guess I'll leave it at that for now, and there's quite a bit to think about, and I'll try to do some more thinking and share that with you in later episodes. But thank you for listening, and bye for now.